Hey, everybody. Welcome to podcast 16 of the Mosaic Podcast, episode 16. It is every podcast that I do, I seem to just have a deeper and deeper appreciation of the guests that I'm bringing on. And today is no exception of that. I want to introduce you to Donald Hoffman, PhD. And he's here with us, so I want to just say, hey, Donald, how you doing? Hey, Don.
Yeah, great to see you, Danny. Thanks for having me on.
It is such an honor to have you here. Let me just take a minute and get your credentials, that part of which I can't even understand, in here in front of people. I tell people that I think I'm sort of a smart person, but when I listen to some of Don's talks and interviews and things, I started to reassess my own intelligence. This is a man who is an extremely brilliant mind. He received his PhD from MIT and is a professor of cognitive science at the University of California in Irvine. He is an author of over 100 scientific papers and 3 books, including his new book, which is what we want to talk about here today a lot, The Case Against Reality. Right. Why evolution hid the truth from our eyes. He's received the Distinguished Scientific Award of the American Psychological Association for Early Career Research, the Rustum Roy Award of the Chopra Foundation, and the Trolin Research Award of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. His writings have appeared in Scientific American and Edge, and his work has been featured in Wired, Quanta, The Atlantic, and Through the Wormhole with Morgan Freeman. He has a TED Talk entitled, Do We See Reality as It Is? And as I said to you, what appealed to me most is in my simple little book, The Mosaic, a fable, one of the underlying stories, messages of the book was nothing is as it seems. And so when I saw Don's work and I saw what he was doing, that in science he was actually proving that the reality we perceive is not the reality that is, I just had to have a conversation with him, and he was kind enough to accept. Welcome again to the Mosaic Podcast, Don. Thank you again for coming on with us.
Thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to just go take a moment and background people. When you were a kid growing up, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, at first I wanted to be an astronaut. I still remember quite vividly the Apollo 11 mission, landing on the moon, and I got tons of newspaper clips and fantasized about being an astronaut that would go to the moon or beyond. And my dad had worked on some of the Mercury rockets. He was an engineer, wow. And so they always got us up early in the morning to see the launches, even before the Apollo stuff. So that was a part of my growing up. I was quite excited by space, and so that was even into my early teens. I was quite excited about that. Absolutely.
And did you ever seriously try and pursue that? Did you actually ever go there and do training and think that that's what I'm going to do?
No, I never did. I went on to do more work in artificial intelligence and computer vision and so forth. And I realized that it is not just the intellectual desire. You need to be a certain kind of physical specimen.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I wasn't quite that physical specimen that they would want to have in outer space. So
that takes a lot. I mean,
it does. You have to be brilliant and tough. So
wow. So when you were, what brought you into AI and all this research that you were doing? How did that open up for you?
Well, it was again a sort of a personal odyssey. My dad was a Protestant fundamentalist minister.
Wow.
And so on the weekends, I got one story about the world. And then in my science classes, I got a completely different story. One story, the Earth is only a few thousand years old. The other story, it's a few billion years old. And, the stories couldn't be more different. And so as a teenager, it was very interesting to me. And I wanted to understand. I mean, the ideas from the scientific side seemed quite rigorous, but we seem to be a machine from the scientific side. And from the religious side, they weren't nearly as rigorous, and I wasn't encouraged to actually think for myself. But on the other hand, we weren't machines. And so there was something I liked and disliked from each side, and I needed to sort of sort it out for myself. And so I decided I wanted to go after the question, are we machines? And to try to
Wow.
be precise about that. Are people machines? And of course, religion doesn't give you any tools to actually investigate that, but science does. And so I found out when I was an undergraduate at UCLA taking a class that there was some really interesting research going on by a guy named David Marr at MIT, where he was doing artificial intelligence. He was in the artificial intelligence lab trying to make computer vision systems. And he was also in what's now the Brain and Cognitive Sciences department. So he was doing AI, but actually studying human psychology, human perceptions. And I thought that was the right combination for me. So I lucked out. I got to be his graduate student for more than a year. He died while I was a student. He died very young. But
Wow.
I was with him for, I don't know, 15 months but then continued and worked in the artificial intelligence lab. And the idea was, it's one thing to ask abstractly, are we machines, and sort of hypothesize about it. It's another thing to get in there and try to build machines that actually are intelligent. That's how you really learn what's going on. And so I decided to just get in there and really try to build stuff. And vision was interesting for me anyway, so I tried to build computer vision kinds of systems, object recognition, three-dimensional perception from motion, and so forth. And the idea is that if you're interested in the big questions, you really can't start off tackling the big questions. You need to tackle some smaller questions and learn the tools. And so that's what I did for a few years. I did my PhD on specific, difficult but constrained problems in visual perception and computer vision. But that gave me the tools to then step back and try to address the bigger questions. So that's how I sort of got into it.
Incredible. So I can imagine some listeners now saying, what in the heck is he talking about, that we're machines, that science tells us we're machines? Can you, in layman terms,
Sure.
tell us how old were you when you started to question, are we machines?
Early teens.
Early teens. So
Yeah, I was pretty geeky.
while everybody else is out playing basketball and football
Right.
and baseball, you're thinking, are we machines? What in the world made you have that question?
Well, I think it helped that my mom was a computer programmer. So I was introduced early on to computer programming. And I actually wrote my first program on punch cards. Actually, even before that, I did these bubble cards where you do it with a pencil, you bubble in and so forth. And so I was doing stuff back in the early 70s. I was programming. So I got into it early, which was good. It gave me that kind of mindset to think about algorithms and doing things on computers. And that helps you to then ask, are our minds, are our brains just simply really complicated computers? And we see that today. Everybody now has heard about artificial intelligence. And we're seeing computers that can beat us at Go, that can beat the world champion at chess, that are now doing things like we wouldn't have believed. They can now they can walk. Some robots can do parkour. They can do all these weird moves where they can figure stuff out on the fly, and they can do backflips. Their AI is what's telling you what you might want to see next on Netflix or
Yeah,
what you might want to buy next on Amazon and so forth. And they get it right most of the time.
yeah.
So it's now in the general awareness that artificial intelligence computers can do stuff that's pretty intelligent, that's pretty surprising, and they can even beat us at our own game. And I see no obstacle in principle to computers in the very near future writing the best poetry in the world, the best novels, the most moving movies. They'll be able to do it all, and including my job, basic research, what we think the most creative stuff, they'll beat me at it hands down.
Wow.
They might not do it the same way that I do it, but they will still be able to beat me at it. So this raises the question, what's the difference between us and machines? Are we just, our neurons in our brains just really complicated, different versions of what's happening in the silicon chips of a computer? Is that all we are? Just complicated computers?
So I understand it from that way back. I understand that when you see what AI is capable of doing,
Right.
can we humanize AI to the point where there's very little distinction between the feelings of a human being and what a machine does? But how did you have it in the early teens to think, am I a human, actually just a machine?
Well, that was sort of the standard view in science. So
Wow.
science basically says the fundamental building blocks of reality are space and time and particles like electrons and protons and neutrons and so forth. And these things are unintelligent. They just mindlessly obey certain laws of physics. And so effectively they're machines. They're machines that obey certain laws of physics. And the story is that if you get enough atoms working together in a complicated enough way, they might form a brain. And if that brain has enough complicated activity, then you might get the first flickerings of consciousness coming out, and you might actually get something that's truly intelligent. And which they're separate things. Intelligence and consciousness are separate things, but the idea is that atoms and molecules and so forth that are themselves not conscious and are themselves not intelligent, they're just mechanical. They mechanically obey laws of physics. In complicated systems, somehow the magic of intelligence and the magic of consciousness, where the magic of consciousness is a deeper magic than just the magic of intelligence, will emerge from their complex behavior. So that was sort of the mindset that was right up in front of me in terms of my science classes, and that really is the mindset of most of my colleagues in the sciences to this day. That it's
Wow.
space and time and particles, quantum fields are the fundamental reality. They're mechanical, and we're nothing but some complicated particles and interaction in space-time. And so if we think we're more than that, then we've got some explaining to do, and probably we're a little bit confused.
So is that the place where science and religion sort of appeared to separate at times? Because I doubt, growing up as a spiritual man, not a scientific man, I sit and wonder now as I look at how quantum physics and science is actually out proving the reality of the world is not the reality that we see, even beyond the metaphysical realm of what's going on. But to think, I, I want listeners to just listen carefully, because you can see why I wanted to have Don on the show. He already starts out thinking that as a team, that the way the mind operates is really no different than the way a machine operates. And so if that's the case, are we really just machines in a different form? Would that be fair to say that was what you were thinking, or would you?
Absolutely. That's absolutely what I was thinking. That was the question I was posing. I didn't want to prejudice the answer. I didn't want to say that that was the case, but that was definitely the framework of the scientific view, and it is to this day. I would say I'm in the cognitive sciences department at UC Irvine, and we're trying to model the mind. We're trying to model human intelligence and language and vision and memory and learning and child development, cognitive development. We're doing all of that with computational models, all of it.
Wow.
So we have a theory when we have a computer that can do it. That's sort of the idea, at least in principle, but often in practice, we build a computer model that actually does the actual intelligent behavior. And so I would say that 99% of my colleagues would say, of course we're machines. I mean, what
Wow.
else could you be thinking? Of course we're machines, and we need to explain from fundamental principles that are not intelligent and are not conscious. We have to show how unconscious ingredients with the right computational structure can give rise to what we call intelligence, and then more deeply what we call consciousness. So that's the standard. So that's the standard view among scientists today. I would say more than 95% of my colleagues
Wow.
in my field, absolutely.
I'm sitting here thinking that I started out by saying I thought I was somewhat intelligent, but I don't think I've ever heard that expressed that way. That human, because there's a big in a lot of the world that I live in and see, people are scared of machines because they don't think they're machines. They think we're going to lose the humanization of ourselves through the AI, through what's going to come through computers, through all of that, what's going to happen to the to the capacity to feel. But even as you were talking earlier, you're saying some of the best poetry will be written by machines.
Absolutely. There are already examples of it now. There's music that I've heard written by machines that is actually quite beautiful. It's brand new novel stuff, new innovations. And in, AlphaGo and AlphaZero, no one thought that a machine would beat world-class players at this really tough game of Go. It's much, much more complicated than chess. And we now have the ability to take a program, have it start at zero, have no talent at all, play against itself for 2 weeks, and after 2 weeks, it can beat the best in the world.
Wow.
And it does it in ways that blow the world champions' minds. They then become the students of this machine because it's coming up with new strategies and moves and new ways of, quote unquote, thinking about the game that they'd never thought about before. So we're actually, the best people in the world are actually now, in some cases, sitting at the feet of the machines and learning from them. That's already happening. And I have no doubt that it will happen with poetry and prose and operas and novels and the whole bit.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and that's only after 2 weeks of, right? That's not after 2 years or 20 years or 200 years or,
Right.
So is this what you talk about in the case against reality?
I mentioned it a little bit, but my argument in the case against reality is to look at why my colleagues think that we are just machines and why they think that space and time and unconscious matter is the fundamental nature of reality. And the main point that I make in the book is that physicalist framework that they believe in turns out to be at odds, to be contradicted by another theory that most of my colleagues also subscribe to, namely evolution by natural selection. And so what I've done is
talk about evolution by natural selection, if you will.
Right. So this is the standard view among biologists now, and I would say most scientists, that we have been shaped by natural selection. So it's an evolutionary process, first described, in some detail by Charles Darwin back in 1859 in his book The Origin of the Species, and it's since been expanded, and it really is an incredibly beautiful theory. I love the theory of evolution by natural selection. It's now mathematically precise. It accounts for an incredible amount of biological data. In fact, in some sense, without that theory, most of biology wouldn't make sense, and most of human psychology wouldn't make sense. So it's an incredibly powerful theory for understanding not only just how our organisms evolved over billions of years, but how our minds have evolved. There's a field called evolutionary psychology, which actually predicts the logic of our emotions and gives us insight into that. So it's an incredibly powerful theory. And what I do then is I use that theory, which is mathematically precise, and I ask a very simple question. The question is this: if our senses, like vision and smell and touch and taste, evolved, if our senses evolved and they were shaped by natural selection, what is the probability that they tell us truths about objective reality? What is?
Okay, hold on a minute. This is so powerful. I want to slow down. I want to make sure everybody gets it.
Right.
Natural selection is fill in the blank.
Natural selection is the process that Darwin really first pointed out, in which you have, in the standard model, you have organisms that have random mutations in their genome.
Slow down.
Oh, okay.
Right. Okay. So when people think about Darwin, they think about survival of the fittest. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's right. And organisms, so if you have two organisms competing, the one that runs faster or can eat better or can have more offspring or whatever it might have a little bit of an edge and be more likely to have children.
Okay.
And those children will have the genes, the genetic code of the parent that was more successful. And so they will inherit the more successful body or the more successful strategy. It might be a certain kind of strategy for living. And so what happens is, now, evolution is not always nice. 99% of all species that have been on this planet are extinct.
Wow.
So it's in some sense, evolution is a teaching or learning system. but the learning system is such that if you don't learn, you die. Right?
Wow.
If you have the wrong algorithm, you die, and 99% of all species are gone. And so what happens is you get these incremental changes. And so my colleagues have assumed that if there are two organisms competing, two of our ancestors, right?
Yeah.
And one of them can see the truth about objective reality, about the world around us, a little bit better than the one they're competing against. The organism that sees a little bit more of the truth would have an advantage in the competition for resources in life.
That's what the people that you're going against believe.
Well, that's right. That's right. That's what they would.
That's what the common thought in science is those who have a better perception of reality would be able to deal with reality better and conquer those who have a lesser perception.
That's right. They'll be more fit.
And in the case against reality,
right,
you say?
Just the opposite. So that the organisms that see the truth about the objective world, see reality, are never more fit than organisms of equal complexity that see none of reality and are just tuned to what evolutionary biologists call the fitness payoffs. And I should just say maybe what a fitness payoff is.
Please.
So think about a T-bone steak, nice big juicy T-bone steak. For a hungry lion that needs to eat, that T-bone steak offers lots of fitness payoffs. That would really help the lion to stay alive and so forth. For that same lion, if it's full and looking to mate, that T-bone steak offers no fitness payoffs whatsoever. It's not going to, you're not going to have kids with that steak.
Right.
And for a rabbit, for any state of the rabbit and any action, the T-bone steak's not going to do it any good. And that gives you an intuition about what evolutionary biologists are talking about fitness payoffs. They depend on whatever the objective reality might be. And in this metaphor, I'm using the steak as a symbol for the reality, although I'm not claiming that steaks are real, but just for sake of this example. But the point is that the reality, whatever the reality is, it is not the final determiner of the fitness payoff. It depends on the organism, like the lion versus the rabbit, its state, hungry versus full, and the action, feeding versus mating versus fleeing, and so forth. And so these fitness payoffs, here's the way to think about them. If you've ever played a video game, what you have to do is focus on getting points. If you do anything else but get points, you're messed up. But if you work really hard and really pay attention and grab points as quickly as you can, you might get to the next level of the game. Well, evolution is just like that. You're in life, you're out there grabbing fitness payoffs. Those are the points. And if you get enough of them, then you don't go to the next level, but your children go to the next generation. And if you think about evolution that way, you're not going to be not too far off. That's actually a good way to think about it. And what I was able to show with my colleagues, some graduate students, Brian Marion and then also Chetan Prakash and a couple others, I was able to show in simulations and with a theorem that organisms that see the truth, that see reality as it is, will go extinct if they compete against organisms that see none of reality and are just tuned to the fitness payoffs.
And that's because the fitness payoffs are the points that you need to get in order to succeed. That's right. And the truth will actually get in the way of you going for those fitness payoffs.
That's right. It's someone who is trying to, if someone whose perceptual systems were showing it the truth, that's just playing the wrong game. It's like someone playing chess and chasing after the pawns. That's not the game of chess. You're chasing after the wrong thing. And if you do that, you're going to lose to someone who's focused on the king. And that's what's happened. That's the essence of my theorem with Chetan, is that chasing the truth is not the same thing as chasing fitness payoffs, and you will lose if you chase the truth. You have to choose fitness payoffs, and they almost never align with the truth.
Wow. So at what point do moral values and things of that nature get in the way of fitness points versus the truth, or do they? The people that chase the fitness points, in other words, have to sort of not look at morality or kindness or the sort of the classic things of compassion, that because if I'm just chasing the points, I'm like, move out of my way. I'm going to go for my points. And if I hurt somebody along the way, I hurt somebody along the way because I've got to get the points in order for my kids to survive. Does that make sense what I'm asking you?
It's a good question, and it really does raise an important difference in the whole mindset between many spiritual traditions on the one hand and the physicalist theory of evolution by natural selection. In evolution by natural selection, the idea of fundamental morals isn't there.
Wow.
It's really about chasing fitness payoffs, competing. Sometimes you cooperate to get fitness payoffs. It turns out from the theory of evolution, you can show how altruism can evolve. And you can predict with mathematical precision when people will be altruistic and to whom they will be altruistic and to what degree they will be altruistic. So it does actually, evolution by natural selection, as far as I know, is the only mathematically precise theory that we have of altruism that makes correct predictions about people's behavior. But what from the theory of evolution, see, it's a physicalist framework. Space-time and particles are fundamental. Love, morality, right and wrong are not part of the fundamental furniture of that universe. Instead, our emotions about wanting people to do the right thing, our emotions about what's right and what's wrong. Like for us, siblicide feels very, very wrong. It's wrong for brothers and sisters to harm and kill each other.
Right.
What evolution of natural selection does, though, is try to explain how we've evolved those emotions, those moral intuitions, as survival strategies. So it's not assumed that these things are fundamental, that morals and right and wrong are fundamental in the universe. It's assumed rather that they are evolved emotional responses that lead to adaptive behavior within our species and perhaps across species. And yeah.
And you're saying that some of those adaptive behaviors actually are causing us to become extinct, or no? Am I getting that wrong?
Well, no. Adaptive behaviors are, by definition, behaviors that make it more likely that you'll survive long enough to reproduce.
Gotcha. Okay.
So adaptive behaviors are ones that tend to make you pass on your genes, so they don't lead. But of course, it's almost a theorem of evolution that every species does end up extinct.
Wow.
And maybe it is a theorem, but 99% of them already have ended up extinct, and it may be a theorem that every species goes extinct. I don't know.
So how do you, as a human,
right,
not a machine, maybe as a human who is a machine,
right,
put in play these points of view? Like, can you show me an example of someone who bypassed love and harmony and whatever, all those things that we look to as from a spiritual point of view, right, as the traits that we want to develop and manifest, but developed adaptive behaviors that caused us to be altruistic to something, to proliferate, to being able to keep the species going?
Well, I can give you a hint about how evolutionary biology thinks about altruism.
Okay.
So it's quite interesting, and it turns out it's mathematically precise. It actually makes precise predictions that work. So there's a squirrel called the Belding's ground squirrel, and if a hawk comes flying through the sky or some other predator, one of the squirrels that sees it first will send out an alarm call, and all the other squirrels will then duck into their holes. But notice that that's an altruistic behavior, because what the squirrel is basically doing when it sends out an alarm call, it's saying, aha, look over here, dinner is right here.
Right.
I could be dinner. Come get me. So it's putting itself at risk. And so the question is, why would an organism be shaped by natural selection to do that? And it turns out it's really quite interesting. If you have a gene that codes for that behavior, that says send out an alarm even though it might kill you, if all of your other neighbors also have that gene, notice that if the probability is low enough that you'll die, but the probability is much higher that the rest will survive, then the gene can still get passed to the next generation. You might die, but the
Right.
gene itself will be passed on to the next generation. So the behavior, so altruism works because we share genes with our nearby, what we call our conspecifics, people of this, members of our same species. And so that's called inclusive fitness. So Darwin didn't have that idea. This was a new idea of fitness that came out in
Sorry,
the
that's
1960s.
my dog.
Oh, yes.
He's protecting the house, it sounds like.
That's
Excuse
good.
me for that. So,
So that's the framework now, but there's a deeper point of view. So I'm actually impressed with what evolution can do in terms of explaining the logic of emotions. But I also think that the point that you're making, that we also wonder if there's a deeper reality to notions of love and right and wrong and so forth. And evolution by natural selection doesn't really allow that.
wow.
It doesn't allow that. So my attitude toward it is like my attitude to all scientific theories. I study them. I'm impressed with them. They're some of the best tools humanity has ever come up with. But then I don't believe any of them.
Wow.
And I don't believe my own theories. The whole belief gets in the way. Belief causes stagnation. The idea is to really understand the theories, understand their strengths, even be in awe of their strengths, but also begin to try to find out where they might be flawed and try to break them and come to new theories. And I think that the point that you make about is there a deeper sense of right and wrong that escapes the algorithms and the explanatory tools of evolution? I think that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
And I think that it could be.
It's almost as if I want to say, and the question keeps bubbling up inside me, of okay, we will survive, but who will the survivor be? Will it be somebody we're proud of? Will it be somebody we want to be? Will it be somebody we would want our kids to be? Would it be on a very practical level, the biggest, toughest kid in the school or in the playground or whatever may be the one that survives, but it's not who I would want my child to be.
That's right. So, and I think that that's a legitimate thing for us to think about. I myself feel like this is a really deep problem, and I haven't wrapped my head around it. Now, I'll just give you one concrete example that I think. I mean, I would like a deep theory of morality. I really would like one, and I don't see one yet. And even in the spiritual traditions that I've looked, I've not seen anything that's deep enough and rigorous enough for me as a scientist and a spiritual seeker. And I'll just give you one concrete example of what we need to explain. There's a bird called the blue-footed booby. The mother lays 2 eggs. The chicks, when they hatch, immediately fight each other to the death. Wow. One will peck, whichever one is stronger wins, and pecks the other one to death, and sometimes puts it out, throws it out in the sun, and it cooks to death. The mother's sitting there. The mother doesn't interfere at all. She watches her own baby, her own chick, die right before her eyes. She did it to her sibling.
Wow.
Why? So that's siblicide. And why is that? Well, in the niche where the blue-footed booby lives, there are not enough resources to raise 2 chicks. There's only enough resources to raise 1. It's very, very austere. And so the evolutionary choice is between siblicide and extinction.
Wow.
And so we live in a universe where that choice is put to a species and the outcome is siblicide. Now, for us as humans, that sounds horrific.
Yeah, it sounds like Nazi Germany, right? I mean,
absolutely. Absolutely. But for that species, the other choice is extinction. Wow. So as a scientist, I don't want to blink. I don't want to turn my eyes away from all these phenomena that I see around me. I want a theory of morality that explains why it's wrong for humans to practice siblicide and why the blue-footed booby is forced to practice siblicide. Whatever theory of right and wrong, for me as a scientist, needs to be deep enough not just to explain human behavior, but all animal behavior.
I love it. So as I'm listening to you, and this obviously isn't the theory because I'm not nearly that intelligent, okay? But as I'm listening to you, what I love about what the work that you're doing is you're creating a case against reality to show that reality isn't reality. But really, the 2 options that you presented there is only the reality of those 2 options. There are probably 10 other options that are possible. that bird could find a place where its niche could support more than one place.
Right.
And so to settle in for the reality that is the reality it seems like it's a step backwards from the work that you're doing, which is to say the reality isn't the reality. Does that make sense to you at all in a convoluted way?
It raises the question of what options did the bird have, and why does it choose that option, which involves such a horrible thing as siblicide, what seems to, and what deep understanding of right and wrong, of morality, can we come to that allows us to understand and to make right judgments about what is right, and is it truly wrong for the blue-footed booby to commit siblicide? I mean, that's an interesting question. Is it wrong? And in what deep grounds is it wrong? So there, I think, by the way, I don't have any original research on that. And I raise the question just because as a scientist, I think it's interesting and we don't have an answer. I've never seen an answer that's satisfactory.
Yeah.
So part of science is looking at what you don't know and looking squarely in the face of what you don't know and not trying to avert your eyes.
So when science gets to a place where it in and of itself is in awe of the results that it's found, right, because it's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating that this is the way that a science that talks about allowing a species to continue on would literally annihilate half of its opportunity, right? Because it would seem counterintuitive that would be the way a species would continue on.
Right.
What is science? What is the possibility that for however many hundreds of thousands of years these birds have been practicing these practices, would then be able to see something they don't see and develop a new practice? Is that within the realm of possibility within the scientific world?
Oh yes, we see that kind of change in behavior and adaptation to new niches and changes in the environment happening all the time, and those that don't make the adaptive move end up
become extinct.
Absolutely, and our species itself appears to have adapted to a wide variety of niches. And we grew bigger brains for quite a while. One interesting thing that's not widely known about our species is that for the last 20,000 years, our brains have been shrinking.
Wow.
We've lost the volume of a tennis ball, about 10% of our brain volume in only 20,000 years. So we took the escalator up and we're taking the elevator down.
Wow.
Brain volume, and it appears that it seems to be correlated with the advent of agriculture and bigger social groups, and those social groups give us a social safety net. We don't die as easily now because there are other people that can help us out, and that's good. Most of us wouldn't be here without that social safety net, but as a result there aren't the selection pressures that force you to be really, really smart and have a big brain and really strong body. So our brains have shrunk and we're not nearly as robust physically as we were 20,000 years ago.
So one of the reasons why this really interests me is some of the work that I want to do is with a company called Unanimous AI, and they are looking at the way some other species in nature operate. Okay. They're looking at the way birds fly and fish swim and bees find a hive. And they're finding that there's a mentality called of swarm intelligence. They're finding that a lot of species in the world come together because they do not have the mental capacity on their own to solve complex problems, and they come together and move as one collective connected mind.
Right.
And that in that they find solutions to things that they couldn't see as a solo mind, and that world of what you're speaking of is a vertical reality where one is stronger than the other. One tells the other what to do. One changes the other by telling them that they have to beat them to do that. And the world that I'm envisioning coming into this new paradigm is where that world will become extinct on its own, because the swarm mentality will be able to help us make decisions. Because here's the dilemma for me. Like, it's fascinating. I'm in awe listening to you speak of these birds, but then you translate that into the human experience, and it would be catastrophic. It would seem to the human species to have that be the way we operate. And yet it sort of is the way we operate.
Right. Well, we have in the past been a very brutal species. And
Yeah.
the homicide rate among us, before we had big governments, there was a really good chance that a man would die at the hands of another man.
Totally.
20-30% of us, I think, maybe even more, died that way. And there's good evolutionary reasons for that. I mean, we were competing for resources, and there's human nature hasn't changed that much, but in the last few hundred years, with larger, enlightenment values and especially government social structures, we've taken out some of the triggers of some of what are called, what we've allowed the better angels of human nature to proliferate, and not triggered the dark side of human nature, which is still there. And so Steven Pinker has a great book called The Better Angels of Our Nature, and he goes into this about how homicide rates have dropped dramatically from prior to modern Western democracies. They've dropped dramatically, and it's not because human nature has changed, but because our new democracies play right with human nature and bring out the better aspects of human nature.
And so I'm wondering if the whole model of survival of the fittest might be adapting to a new model of survival of the righteous or something like that. I don't quite know what that terminology is, but if you would say to humankind, we're going to go back to the days of the cowboys where you have a disagreement, we're going to go out in the street and have a shootout, right?
Right.
Which is not that far back.
Nope.
Right? And it was commonplace that we would do that. We would think that's prehistoric, that we would think that's not the way to go. So here's, I guess, the question I want to ask. In the work that you're doing in science, what is it you hope the application will be for the future of the planet?
Well, my first goal is I'm trying to understand consciousness. By that I mean, just simple things like the smell of coffee, the taste of chocolate, the feeling of velvet, the sound of a trumpet. My colleagues who are physicalists have been trying to explain how unconscious matter could somehow, by having complicated interactions, create conscious experiences, and they've utterly failed. So that whole worldview, despite all of its successes, and the successes are amazing. Evolution by natural selection is an amazing theory. Quantum field theory is amazing. General relativity is amazing. But they cannot get a theory of everything because they can't get us. They can't get our experiences. That's called the hard problem of consciousness. It's one of the biggest unsolved problems in science, and they recognize that it's a big unsolved problem. And so the scientists realize that for all the successes that our theories have had, we're leaving out something really, really big, which is our own conscious experiences. And so that was one reason why I started doing these evolutionary models, because I wanted to explain why we're failing. I wanted to explain that the assumption that space and time and physical objects like electrons and tables and chairs and so forth, the assumption that those things are fundamental is false. That's just wrong. And I'm now playing with a scientific theory in which consciousness is fundamental. So where I'm actually having a mathematical model of consciousness and then explaining how a reality that's fundamentally conscious could give rise to what we call space and time and physical objects. And I can explain how I think that happens. But
I would love you to do that. But what's making sense to me is for people who grow up thinking that, or for a science practice that grows up believing that the human is a machine, everything that's evolved from that of what you're speaking would make sense, because it's not dealing with the consciousness of being alive and being what a human experiences.
That's right.
And even your definition of consciousness, it's more than just the senses. And what, the feel of velvet or the taste of chocolate or the sound of a beautiful trumpet or the sound, those are just our sensual things. That's not really the consciousness of what we of what we have.
Right. Right.
And from a spiritual perspective, the consciousness is of this Godhead, of this unity, of everything being connected, and the power that happens when we are, as a connected reality, come together. Call it, maybe science would now look at it as swarm, but something bigger.
Right.
But let's talk about your place, because it feels like the translation into what we would do with it today and how it would make our society not only just not extinct, but how it would make it a better society. Would it make it a better society?
Well, I think eventually, because we would better understand ourselves as truly conscious beings, not just merely as machines built out of particles. Wow. that are unconscious. So that's what I've been working on, is that the whole scientific framework. I mean, what I love about science is that it has rigorous experiments and rigorous theories, and you try to prove things wrong. I love that about science. But I also think that whole framework in which space-time and unconscious objects like particles is fundamental, that framework is just wrong. And that it's wrong for a fundamental reason. It cannot lead to a scientific theory of consciousness. And we have to, and so I'm actually proposing now that consciousness is fundamental. And there is a swarm aspect to the conscious theory that I'm bringing out. That it's interesting that you bring that up. It turns out I have this notion of what I call a conscious agent. It's a mathematically precise entity. It has experiences and it takes actions. And it turns out when two of these agents interact, they create a new agent. And I can write down the mathematics of it. And so I can have very simple agents, but the swarm of all of them also creates a bigger agent.
Yeah.
And so there will be infinite agents. There'll be an infinite number of infinite agents. And I believe that the mathematics will show that there is an ultimate one that is a swarm of all of them. It's a coherent whole, and yet it is also, all the individuals are also real entities as well within it. So it's a mathematical model that is mathematically precise, and my goal then is to understand consciousness, and at a mathematically precise level where we can make predictions.
Yeah,
we can actually have testable predictions, and the relationship between that and what we call space and time and physical objects is interesting, and I'll come at it from a slightly different angle.
Please.
Someone might say to me, look, if you're claiming that we don't see the truth, that when I see an apple on a table, I'm not seeing the truth. There is no apple, there is no table. Well, how can not seeing the truth be useful? How could our perceptions be useful if they're not showing us truths about the world? And I have an example that I think will really help understand that. And Great. It's the desktop on your computer. Suppose that you're writing an email, and the icon on your desktop for the email is blue and rectangular, and it's in the middle of your desktop. Does that mean that the email in your computer is blue, rectangular, and in the middle of your computer? No. Well, of course not. Anybody who thought that would be really misunderstanding the point of the desktop. It's not there to show you the truth, which in this metaphor is the circuits and voltages and software. I mean, that's a mess inside there. It's really complicated. The whole point of the interface is to hide the truth, to hide that complexity and give you simple eye candy that lets you control the truth, even though you're ignorant of the truth. And so the idea is that that's what evolution did. It gave us perceptions that hide the truth. They're actually shaped by natural selection to hide the truth and to give us eye candy that we can use to stay alive. So three-dimensional space, as you see it around you right now, and you're in the room around you, that's just your three-dimensional desktop. And physical objects like the table and chair and spoon and fork, those are just three-dimensional icons in your desktop. Think about, you have a headset on. This is virtual reality, and it really is just a virtual reality, and you're not seeing the supercomputer behind the virtual reality. And what I'm proposing is the supercomputer behind the virtual reality is this vast network of conscious agents. Mm-hmm. So consciousness is the fundamental reality, and we can model it mathematically. We don't have to wave our hands. Of course, I'm not claiming my theory is right. Almost surely my theory is wrong. But at least it's mathematically precise. For the very first time, we have a mathematically precise theory that we could then go and try to prove wrong about a world that's fundamentally conscious.
Wow.
That's the goal, is to be falsifiable.
Right. Well, the goal, but you have have proven mathematically to work. And so in doing that, it's not like, there is some truth to what you're saying. Now you're putting it out for people to say, find the flaw and we'll correct it if it needs to be corrected, but it may not need to be corrected for whatever the reasons. But what I would be saying in the simplicity of my language is that quantum physics and science is telling us that what we see as solid, it has no solidity in it. It's made up of atoms and neurons and whatever. I'm not smart enough to even know what the components are, but it's just energy moving at speeds at different speeds that resonate to a certain shape that we see in the world that we see around us. But that world is not solid. And in classic Eastern philosophy, they talk about 4 time frames. They're called the yugas. And we have currently been in the lowest possible time frame, which is the time frame of form.
Okay.
And we're moving into the time frame, we're just 200 or 300 years into the time frame of energy, which is the next time frame, but that's still only the next lowest. There's 2 above that. But and those time frames last 2,400 years.
Wow.
So we are just at the very, very at the very verge of understanding that the world we live in is not a form-based world.
Right.
It's an energy-based world. And as we move further and further into that yuga, what we'll start to realize, we're seeing people doing energy healing, but we will start to realize this world that we counted so much on as bread and butter of what we live in is not that world at all.
Right. And scientists are starting to wake up to that in a very interesting way. For the last several centuries, science has assumed that space and time are fundamental. And that as you point out, that particles, mostly empty space, but particles and energy within space and time are the fundamental realities. And now, if you look up, like if you Google the phrase, space-time is doomed.
Wow.
If you Google that phrase, you'll find...
I want to ask everybody listening to the podcast, Google the phrase, space-time is doomed, and just...
You'll find that there's
about.
Some interesting work being done. For example, there's a physicist at Princeton. His name is Nima Arkani Hamed, and he has several videos on the theme, space-time is doomed. And this is based on hard-nosed physics. They realize that space-time has had a good run. It was a good framework for several centuries since Newton, but now we have to let go of it. There's something deeper. They don't know what it is, but space-time will not work. You cannot unify quantum field theory and general relativity within the framework of space-time. We've got to go to something deeper. And what's weird is that physics has been about what happens in space-time. That's what it's been. So when you let go of space-time, it's not really clear what physics is about. And for the bright, young physicists, this is not scary. This is fun. They're about to blow some new windows open and see new things that haven't been seen before. So this is quite good. I mean, space-time, even the idea of energy within space-time is too confining.
Wow.
Energy is too confining because space-time itself has to be blown away. Now, there may be a deeper notion that gives some deeper structure, some deeper understanding that gives rise to what we call space-time and energy within space-time as an emergent phenomenon. They don't know what that deeper thing is, but Nima Arkani Hamed and others are going after it, and who knows how soon we'll find it. But it's pretty exciting. And I'm proposing that deeper reality is consciousness. This vast network of conscious agents. So the way I think about it is, think about big social networks like Twitter, the Twitterverse.
Yeah.
Millions, tens of millions of Twitter users, and they're tweeting and there's billions of tweets. It's a vast social network. There's people following and being followed and so forth. And suppose you're trying to understand the Twitterverse. Well, you can't follow every tweet. That would be overwhelming. There's billions of them. It's big data. You want a visualization tool. And that's what evolution has given us. Space and what we call the physical world is our visualization tool. The reality is this vast social network of conscious agents, which, even though I talk about it as separate conscious agents, I think I can prove it's also just one. So that there's a swarm, but it's also just one. But as a scientist, luckily, I can also analyze it in terms of individual conscious agents and their swarm behavior. But space and time is just a visualization tool that allows a finite agent to try to grasp this overwhelming universe of conscious agents.
I'm in love with all of this because it almost seems as if just like species become extinct, thought processes and scientific beliefs become extinct.
Yes.
Everything in the world over time becomes extinct because it has to give way to a new paradigm that will shift the way we think. And
that's right. Actually, that's a very important idea that you've put out there. Among scientists, they call it universal Darwinism.
Wow.
Universal Darwinism is the idea that not just physical organisms evolve, but even ideas. So they have something called memes, like songs. The Beatles songs are in all of our heads, but not a song that I've written. And it's because their songs are in some sense more fit and they get passed around in our minds. And so the idea is that, yes, scientific theories also compete, and some survive and some don't. So there's this more general notion of evolution called universal Darwinism, which is what you were talking about. Yeah.
Fascinating. So I want to be conscious of our time because I think I could talk to you for the rest of it my time, Your Honor. I want to ask you, out of all that you're doing, out of all the things that you've researched and found, what is the one thing that you would like people to know that they don't know now, or that you would want to leave? That in very simplistic forms, what's the one thing you want people to get?
I would say that one of the most stunning things to me is to realize that you create space and time.
Wow.
And you create the sun and the moon. And you create everything that you see. There is a reality that exists independent of you that you don't create. But that's not what you see. Everything that you see inside space and time, you create it. And when you look at the sun, you create the sun that you see. And when you look away, you destroy. Now, someone else will look and they will create their own sun. And the fact that we agree, that we both say, well, look, there's an apple on the table. Do you see the red apple? Yes, I see it. That doesn't mean that we're seeing the same apple. You're creating your apple, I'm creating my apple. There is some reality, and both of us, because we're members of the same species, we have the same user interface. We use the same icons in our desktop. We use an Apple icon, and that's why we can talk to each other about that red apple. But that doesn't mean that there's really a red apple. You're creating it on the fly. So that's the big one. We're not, I'll put it this way, we're not latecomers. We think of space and time as the pre-existing stage on which the drama of life plays out, and we're tiny bit players that came on billions of years later, and we're nothing. It's quite the opposite. We are the authors of space and time. We create space and time. We create all the physical objects that we perceive. So we're not little bit players. We are the authors of the entire play. And so now there's a deeper reality of what I call this vast network of conscious agents. And we're just part of this big dance. We're part of the big swarm. We're interacting with them. But what we call space, time, and physical objects, you're the author of that. And that to me was stunning.
Stunning reality. So this is the way I end every podcast. And then we'll go to how do people get in touch with you. But
sure.
When you look at the world we live in now, is this the world you always dreamed of handing over to your children and your children's children?
No, not by a long shot. I think that our species has the potential to do far better than we are doing. And the best tools that we have right now for understanding why we're failing are, I think, evolutionary psychology. There's a lot of, if people are interested in some of the best scientific ideas about where we succeed, and why we fail, where we fail, I would read Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, and also his book, Enlightenment Now. So there are some really good ideas. Steve Pinker is a really brilliant thinker on all this. And so the world, in his books, I think there are some really concrete ideas about how we could actually forge social systems and political systems that would actually bring out the better angels of human nature and allow us to move to the next level. And so that's why I would recommend his books on that. So I would say, you know, my answer to your question is no. I think we can do far better, but we really have to look at human nature square in the face and not avert our eyes to not just the good parts, but the bad parts of, you know, what we think of the bad parts. That's part of all of us, and we have to understand that so that we can really understand how to craft political and social systems that bring out the better angels of our nature.
I so want to have a conversation with you offline about some of the things I'm
Sure.
doing and get your input. But in closing, is there one thing that someone listening here could do to help go from that world that we don't want to hand down to our kids to the world that we do? I know you said you got to look it square in the face, but is there one activity, one action, one thing that someone said, if I could just do one thing, what would you recommend they do?
The one thing that I would recommend is to let go of your beliefs. We all believe that we're right. We have deeply held beliefs, and belief, when you look back at human history, we have a consistent track record of being wrong.
Wow.
And we should not assume that we're any exception. So I take all of my ideas and all my beliefs, and I want to not hold them too tightly. Really be open to other ideas, be open to other people's ideas, even if they seem foreign to you. I'm not saying to be a fool and, you know, be gullible, but really don't hold on to our own ideas so tightly. And always try to say, what could someone do? What could I do to show my ideas are wrong? That's really the healthy attitude. What could I do to show my ideas are wrong? How could I state my ideas so precisely that we could figure out why we're wrong? And then that's my goal is, I mean, life is short. I want to understand the human condition. I want to understand what I am. And I don't want to play around. Just because I believe something now, I'm probably wrong. Just admit it up front. Of course I'm probably wrong. Just if we can all just put that on the table, of course I'm probably wrong. Here's my ideas. I'm putting them out there humbly. I would like to listen humbly to your ideas. And then let's try to figure out, you know, where we're wrong, and let's move forward. But, you know, in the past, we actually burned people at the stake who didn't think that the earth was the center of the universe, right? Yeah. That's how deeply we can be wedded to our beliefs and how deeply wrong we can be. And that really gets in the way of progress. So that would be my thing. Be humble and humble about your beliefs and be open to other beliefs.
Love it. Don, if people want to find you, how do they find you? And if people want to get your book, The Case Against Reality, how would they find that?
Oh, so The Case Against Reality is already available on Amazon. So if you just go to Amazon Books and type in The Case Against Reality, it'll come right up as the first thing, and you can pre-order it. It's out in August. And I have a web page. If you just Google Donald Hoffman, Hoffman, like Donald Hoffman homepage, my homepage comes up first. And I have a link there to my Vita. So my curriculum vitae, which has all of my publications, my podcasts and videos, are all listed there. And I have links to electronic copies online for most of it. So you can get all my stuff for free.
And we'll make sure that that's in the notes below too. So Great. Again, I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to just take 1 minute to summarize.
Okay.
I'm so moved by the work that you've done. And I'm so moved by your ability to look at all the research, all the work, all the time, all the going against the grain of what people believe to show something else that might be true. And then at the same time, your statement at the end of the game saying, but I have to now disprove to you what I believe was true. It reminds me of my days when I was studying in the seminary in Israel.
Yes.
And we would spend 6 months on 15 words.
Wow.
Because we would say, this is what this set of rabbis believe. Now, once we know what that is, this set of rabbis disagreed with them. They knew why they believed what they believed. They knew exactly what they thought. Now they believe differently. Why?
Right.
And we would have to take into account, this is why they did that. And then we would go back to the first set of rabbis.
Right.
And we would say, they believe this, and they knew that the other school of thought would believe this. They understood it. And they understood every complaint, everything that proved what they were saying wrong, and they still chose to believe this because of this.
Right.
And it would go on and on and on until there was no place left to go.
That's right. And that kind of openness to other ideas and interpretations is really critical. The extra ingredient is experiments.
Experiments.
Right? So that you say, well, if these ideas were true, then if I did this experiment in nature, I would get this outcome. And if I don't get that outcome, then I'm wrong, or I'm probably wrong. And so that's the magic of science, is that next step is which says, here's what you could do, a real experiment that you could go out there and do. And if it comes out this way, I'm probably wrong.
Wow.
That's the next step that we need.
And I love what you were saying, and then we're going to just close down, but I love what you were saying of, we may have a philosophy of the survival of the fittest, for lack of a better, a layman's technology of it, and that whatever we need to do in order to survive is better seen, even if that means not seeing the truth. But then who we might become once we survive is also a question we have to look at, right?
Yes.
And so I want to, again, thank you for your brilliance. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on to this podcast. I hope you'll come back again. There is like a billion other things that I would like to talk with you about. Run out today. If you haven't already, pause here, go to Amazon, get his book, The Case Against Reality. You will be enamored and you will be charmed, and share this podcast with friends that you know. Thank you again, and remember, everything in this world is connected, so stay connected. Until next time, thank you. Bye.